Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are back for another live episode of the Black Mind Garden where we are remapping minds so you can create a life you design. And I'm super excited because I have a guest here who I've had before, and we had an amazing conversation. And by the way, I have been getting feedback on that conversation ever since, such positive feedback. So we have back today Dahlia Kinsey. Dahlia is the owner of Kinsey Wellness Communications. And, I'm going to let you sort of reintroduce yourself, but I am so excited to have this conversation. This is actually a conversation that Dahlia and I had um, sort of around the first time, like it was sort of behind the scenes the first time that we
Right.
talked. And I was like, this conversation is so useful that I wanted to bring you back. So, welcome back, Dahlia. Welcome, welcome back.
Thank you. Excited to be here. Like you already said, my company is Kinsey Wellness and Communications. I center BIPOC and LGBTQIA plus people in my work because we're so often overlooked. The through line in my work is that chronic stress is one of the biggest threats to our health of modern times. And if you are marginalized in any way, meaning your identities are not centered or celebrated in the world around you, your chronic stress levels are automatically going to be higher. So you need to give yourself more care. You need more stress management tools to work with that and to basically enjoy your life despite the fact that there's so many people and things out there that maybe don't want you to even exist. So,
That part.
the work I do is all about enjoying your life despite all of that.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And because I think it's important that we're able to find that peace inside of the storm. It's like, if we can find the eye of the storm for ourselves from time to time, it gives us a bit of sustainability in being inside of this work. And we were kind of alluding to that. You were talking about that. We were talking about that before the show. So I think it's really important what you do. And so today I'm excited to talk about this topic of pronouns, and not just pronouns, but pronoun mislabeling and all that comes with this space of pronouns and gender identity. Because when we first met, you were sharing with me that you had no pronouns, and so like it's a thing for it was a thing for my brain to get used to. I'm used to some pronoun that I'm working my brain around, and then there was no pronouns. And so it took us into this very juicy conversation about what happens when we mislabel pronouns in people who have either no pronouns or a different pronoun from what we're used to, and the shame, the discomfort, and the way that just the way that we are around it. And so I
Yeah.
wanted to sort of bring the conversation here to to the live space, to the podcast.
I love it because this is something that I haven't really heard talked about very much. The boundary setting element that
Mhm,
comes to letting people know
mhm,
what your pronouns are, or even the correct pronunciation of your name. So, a
mhm,
friend reflected this back to me recently that, like, for them, they said it's never a problem because they're always listening for, they're from a multi ethnic background,
mhm,
and they say they're always listening for what parts of a name are important to the person that they're meeting. Because, for
mhm,
some people, sometimes it's your surname that's super important. Sometimes it's just your first name. You don't want anyone to call you by your surname because it feels too formal or too personal. For a long time, too impersonal, that is. For a long time, there have been lots of individual person by person rules about how do you refer to me in a respectful way. The only
mhm,
thing that's changed is it's expanded to include pronouns.
Mhm.
But some folks who are getting stuck on it are making it this different thing when in reality it's just about respect. What does it mean to you when
Mhm.
somebody always mispronounces your name? Like with
Mhm.
both of us having names that we don't hear all the time in the US, I'm sure it happens to both of us. But you don't immediately get upset when someone's meeting you for the first time and they say your name wrong. That's
Mhm.
literally no big deal. They don't know you. All they've done is reminded you that they don't know you.
Yes.
It becomes a problem when you've met this person like a dozen times
Right.
and and they still can't get it right, or they try to help themselves. Like they'll just say, I'm just going to call you Dr. M. Did I say you could call
Gosh.
me Dr. M? I
Right.
know, see, I don't even have to have been there. I know somebody has done
Right.
that.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So it's really, it just comes down to what is in a name, what's in a pronoun. Like these are the ways that we try to explain to other people who we are. But more than anything, it's like what words, what sounds do we recognize as you are speaking to me? So
Mhm.
for me, for a while, I felt like I just couldn't find a pronoun that felt like it fit.
Mhm.
And sometimes when someone really mispronounces your name, you legitimately don't know that they're talking to you.
Mhm.
Sometimes that's how it felt. It was like, well,
Mhm.
that can't be me. It doesn't feel like that applies to me.
Mhm.
And the only thing that felt like it made any sense was not to have any at all. I'm like,
Mhm.
I do recognize my name.
Mhm.
I feel like my relationship to gender has always been fluid. And
Mhm.
so it makes sense that I can't seem to settle on any pronoun. Nothing
Right.
feels like a fit. And as I've gotten older, and I really think some of this could be my own hormonal changes over time, it
Mhm.
has gone from feeling more fluid to it doesn't even exist in my body at all. So it
Mhm.
just feels like anybody putting any kind of gender on me is just telling me that they don't really know, they don't know me. And
Mhm.
so what's been difficult, having been socialized female and raised in the South,
Mhm.
questioning anybody, even correcting them when they're saying your name wrong,
Yeah.
in the 80s and the 90s, and I would even say the early aughts, for a lot of people, that's just something you're not allowed to do.
Yeah.
That's something that maybe if you're socialized male, sure, you can tell people what your name is and that they're saying your name wrong. But literally, the rule was always you don't correct people. People don't like that. Is it physically harming you to let them call you the wrong name? No? Okay, well, then don't say anything. So it's been
Mhm.
really challenging getting to the point of letting people know actually that isn't how I recognize myself. And
Yeah.
for me, it feels like you don't know me if you don't, get on board.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Just I love the way you contextualized inside of names and respect, right? And how we recognize ourselves. And it's interesting because this piece of it's not okay to correct, it still exists today. My son's name is Delson, and people will and it's spelled Delsyn, so people will call him all manner of different names. And what I notice about him is that he won't correct people,
Mm,
right? And I will often be doing the correcting, like, no, it's Delson, not Delsim, not Dawson, not Dawson, not like all the various things that get called. And I think also because I grew up with, Masia and Marisha and Militia, although there's like none of those consonants in my name. It's I come to have a lot of practice in. No, it's Maisha, not Masia, right? And so it's I think that just that in and of itself, like the what we've been conditioned to do and not do around setting boundaries around
right.
people correctly identifying us, whether it be by name and or by pronoun or lack thereof. I think that's something that's extremely important to recognize.
Yeah, definitely. And to know that just because someone hasn't told you directly that you keep misgendering them or that you keep mispronouncing their name
Mhm.
doesn't mean they haven't noticed and doesn't mean it's not bothering them.
Mm-hmm.
You would think, especially in cultures that seem like, hey, we're about telling you like it is, you would think that we would all maybe be more forthcoming, but
Mm-hmm.
it is that boundaries piece where we taught that it's safe to set boundaries, where we taught that people get mad at us if we set any kind of boundary or make them feel wrong in any way. So it feels like there's two layers to this. There's people out there who are terrified of getting anything wrong, and so they're so fearful around being around people who don't have the pronouns that they're used to or that they've been raised with, because they're afraid they're going to get wrong and people are going to call them out, and
Mm-hmm.
it'll be the end of the world where they make a mistake in public.
Yeah.
And then the other side is, well, some people don't want to make any waves. And if you don't make it crystal clear that you want to honor pronouns and you want to honor like the full person, we want to learn to say people's names no matter how unfamiliar they are to us, and
Mm-hmm.
learn their pronouns no matter how unfamiliar they are to us, and have things in place that make it easier. Like,
Mm-hmm.
would it be easier if it's a standard in the company to always put your pronouns
Mm-hmm.
when you have virtual meetings?
Right.
Like, is there more stuff you can put in place? Not everybody's memory is airtight.
Mm-hmm.
um, we don't generally expect people to know the name of every single person who works at a very large company,
Mm-hmm.
but there's generally lots of things in place when you're going to be around people you don't know well. The only step is include the pronouns
Yeah.
as well, and maybe give people a general overview of the fact that not everybody has them. Some people are using neo pronouns, so sometimes pronouns will be words that you never heard before.
Mm-hmm.
So being open to that and just being ready to try to say it and ask for help if you need help. The same way, if you meet somebody with a name you've never heard before, you give it your best shot and you probably get it wrong. But then you ask again and you put something in place so that it doesn't become a negative experience for that person. Because
Yeah.
asking a couple times because you didn't hear something or because you've never heard it before is no big deal. It's when you act like, oh boy, this is going to take me forever to
Mm-hmm.
understand, then you make the person feel uncomfortable, like it's a weird request, like it's a big request, like they're the only person in the world who's like this, and it will make them feel other and maybe isolated.
Mm-hmm.
If you act like it's going to be such a
Mm-hmm.
feat for you
Yeah.
to take it on. So for me, usually if I'm at like a networking meeting or at a bigger meeting at work, I
Mm-hmm.
just have a notebook with me, or I have it in my notes app on my phone.
Mm-hmm.
I'll add people's pronouns to their name to try and help myself along when I see them. So
Yeah.
they don't feel like, I've met Dahlia 2 dozen times and no progress has been made.
Right. It's really great. I wanna talk a little bit about this space of messing up, and because I think that it's a really tender space, and it definitely needs to be talked about. And I think there is definitely there's a relationship to trauma and white supremacism culture, and there's it's all interrelated. And just you mentioned, like, there are some people who are so afraid of messing up that they'll avoid situations and circumstances completely. What I want to say is that, from the perspective of someone who again, like, when you grow up, and you understand this, when you grow up in your brain with a binary system,
Mm,
and then you're learning a new system, it's inevitable that you're going to mess up, because you're literally creating new neurological connections in your brain to be able to associate with a person, and to associate with a spectrum of what we're used to, right?
right.
What we've been culturalized to say and think and do. And so, um, when I know that, like, the first couple of times that we talked, like, put in a pronoun there, and I was like, oh, I did it again. And I will admit that there was some internal feeling about that.
Mm,
And so I think that for people who are intentionally uh, um, wanting to respect people's names and pronouns, and I'll share it with you that when it comes to pronouncing names, I feel very strongly about pronouncing a person's name the way they would normally pronounce it. And so sometimes when I meet people from different areas, different uh, ethnic backgrounds or cultural backgrounds, and I'll say, "What's your name?" and they say some other name than what I see. Like one is Tim, and they'll say, "Just call me Tim." And I'll say, "How would you pronounce it?" Because
right.
I like to pronounce a name that you were born with. And I will ask, if I so the way my brain works is I need to say a name 3 times in order to remember it. So let me get it right, and then let me say it 3 times. And I just explain that to people,
Mm,
and then
yeah.
they understand that's just how my brain works, right? So I like to really bring this context of how our brain works and our programming into it, because when we are learning someone's name, when we are learning someone's pronouns and how they identify, um, it's important to understand that each time we're learning, we're creating new neurological connections in the brain. And so messing up is kind of part of that, unless you have like a photographic memory or an audiographic, like autographic, auditory system, right? Then you might mess up a couple of times. And we have to be willing to um, be in the discomfort of that, but also give ourselves some grace for that.
Yeah.
I think in the activism space, because there's been so much trauma around intentional mislabeling, that it has caused, and you can, like, tell me if what you've experienced around this or what you've seen around this. But I think because there's been so much trauma around mislabeling, intentional mislabeling, that it creates a hypervigilance around, for some people, like it's one way or the other. It's, I'm not going to say anything, or the moment you mislabel me, I'm going to, like, depending on what the trauma response is, I'm going to jump
Mm,
all over you. And
right.
so I think it goes both ways. Like, there is recognizing that there is trauma from being, sort of immediately like, no, it's this, right? And
Right.
also us understanding that that happens because there are people who intentionally mislabel their
It's
pronouns
so
and mispronounce the
interesting
name.
because the only incident I've had where that happened where the person immediately was like, no, it's this, was when, again, no labels, nobody's pronouns were beside their name in this meeting.
Mhm,
And I said they, which is in my head a default, and it has been since childhood. Before
mhm,
we were universally using they for a lot of non-binary people, they was
mhm,
always used when you did not know the gender of the
mhm.
person you were speaking about.
That's true.
And because I've always felt very unattached to one gender,
Mhm,
everybody in my head is usually they, which I know is
mhm,
not accurate. But this person is a cis femme person, and she wanted to make sure everybody knew it was she, her. And I've
mhm.
never had a cisgender person have that kind of like
Wow.
reaction. But I think it could be in response to some people feeling like their gender identity is being erased by
Mhm,
gender expansiveness, which is
mhm.
not at all what it does.
Right.
But so it's interesting. There's like so many feelings around
Mhm.
pronouns right now, not just for people who are constantly being misgendered because it's not the default that people are used to.
Yeah,
It really feels like universally there's a lack of grace that people are willing to give people. And
yeah.
I can understand people are burned out, like you said. People
Mhm,
have been really traumatized by a lot of intentional harm.
mhm,
But when our goal is communication and we know that some people are learning new things, we
mhm,
have to acknowledge, like you said, how the human brain works and that
mhm.
things won't change overnight.
Mhm.
But also, if you're that person who's gotten like a snippy response from somebody, also understand it may feel to this person like they've answered this question a million times.
Right.
True, you weren't there those other times. But sometimes, it just feels like, this again.
Yeah.
And maybe the response that you give the person, it's kind of collective frustration, and
Yeah.
they just were the person who was there when you kind of had enough.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think this is yet another reason that we need to understand trauma and trauma responses. Because when we start to understand that, we can give ourselves grace, we can give other people grace. And when we ourselves, like, that's very interesting what you said, like a cis femme person reacted in that manner.
Yeah, they ate me up, man.
Right, right. Yeah. I mean, and a lot, that's fear. Like, there's this fear. There's, like you said, there's so many feelings that are washing around, which is very interesting because the fluidity of identity is not a new thing.
Right,
It's just something that is now being brought to the forefront in the activism space, and boundaries are being set around. It's being named more often, right? Just like sexual orientation is not like, the it's the fluidity of sexual orientation is not a new thing.
right,
Like, that you go back, way back in history, and find, you know, same sex, and opposite sex relationships, and all of the all of the spectrum in between.
right.
It's historical. And yet, because of this sort of colonizer culture, and there being rules that are now being set to keep people in power, um, it narrows what we've been used to have been seeing for over a period of time, and now it seems like it's new.
And that is a great way to put it, because even now there's this push to remove trans people from public view.
Hmm.
I don't really think, maybe some people believe that you can put enough pressure on a group of people for them to cease to exist. But I think a lot of people really just want to push people out of public view. They don't care what is going on as long as it's not spoken about. But people aren't going to disappear. And now that more of us want and welcome people bringing themselves as a whole,
Hmm.
the full self,
Hmm.
out into the world, into their creative life, into work, wherever, it's not, we're not going back. It's not happening. But you see a lot of the things that people are making such a fuss over that seem relatively small, like sports or bathrooms. These are areas where visibility is the issue.
Hmm.
And the pressure is, you just should be invisible. We know you existed before, but we would like for you to make yourself small. And we
Hmm.
don't want to have these conversations. We don't want to make more room. When in reality, the shift is very small. It's
Hmm.
just that anti transness and that desire to keep everything just so the patriarchy continues to do what the patriarchy does.
Hmm.
That is really what we're seeing. That's what the pushback is.
And it's interesting because you can see this in the the LGBTQI community, like that movement, but you can also see it in immigration, like the erasure of this, like, you know people who are coming, what, specific immigrants, let's just put it like that. Right.
Yeah.
The erasure of history of Black and brown people. I mean, there's so much erasure that is being attempted, and it's simply a fear of a loss of power.
Mm,
It's a fear of a loss of power. When someone feels threatened, then they react by trying to erase out of visibility and out of existence, quite frankly, um, another group of people.
yeah.
And so, I think that, um, right now, what we're seeing is, the trans community, the Black community, and the immigrant community are now probably being the most affected, you know, in like visibly speaking.
Yeah, being
Um,
pressured to disappear,
yeah.
and also being faced with all of these like respectability politics
Hmm.
within each of those individual communities, where there is pressure to be smaller and to be less
Hmm.
visible. So
Hmm.
whether that is pressure to present yourself as like pick a gender, right? You get that sometimes even from trans folks, like you need to pick one, or you're not really trans if you're not presenting as the opposite of what you were assigned,
Mm.
making more rules about how to be in response to the pressure to just disappear.
Right.
People come up with more palatable versions,
Right.
trying to like make a bargain with
Right.
can I be my true self, or can I just have a little bit of being my true self? And
Right.
on an individual level, when you have to decide how out you're going to be for safety, never judge yourself,
Hmm.
because you're dealing with real concerns:
Yeah.
safety, loss of employment, all kinds of stuff,
Yeah.
rejection from family.
Hmm.
But at the same time, understand that people are asking for you to give up something that other people aren't asked to
Hmm.
give up. Like, why can't you bring your full self into
Right.
the space?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
if you're only allowed to present your gender in a way that feels confining, even according to other people who, in theory, have a similar label as you,
Hmm.
are you really comfortable with that? Like, does that really feel like freedom to you, or
Right.
do you want more? And that's a question that people have to answer on a one-to-one basis. And it's okay for
Hmm.
that to change over time. Like, maybe later, if you feel more safety in your personal life or professional life, you'll
Hmm.
want to take up more space, and you'll want to demand that people acknowledge the full you.
Yeah.
But there are also some people who really have no attachment to their coworkers knowing them in a complete way.
Hmm.
And maybe they'll never want to fully be authentic at work. And
Hmm.
that says something about the environment as well.
Yeah.
But, that's also okay. You just
Hmm.
have to deal with the reality of what is, but also that includes how is your body responding? How are you responding to feeling unseen, a major part of your day?
Yeah. So interesting. It really brings me to thinking about the another conversation we were having prior to this episode, which is around code switching.
Mm.
It just ties right back into that, just from a different sort of perspective. Like if you feel like you're needing to, it's almost like a gender code switch.
Yeah,
And I never even thought about that in that way, right? But it's true. It's like, we how what are the ways in which, or what are where are we coming from the space of code switching? Is it safety? Is it they don't really need to know who I am? Like, is a sense of
right.
privacy, right? And all of whatever it is okay for you to make that switch, and also be mindful of the space from which you're making it, and is that a space that is that is constricting and confining and boxing you in, that doesn't feel like freedom. Perhaps there is an opportunity for you to find a community or a place that allows for you to be your full authentic self.
Yeah,
We teach this about just in terms of other identities of people of color, like find a place where you can belong. That's a word,
right.
right? The belonging piece. And I think this is so true for the space of the gender identity spectrum as well. Like, find a place that the community that's going to respect, honor, welcome, where you feel like you can be your true self and belong in
Right.
those spaces.
And that's going to invite you to be a complex human being, and invite you to bring in more nuance, and
Right.
make you feel like it's safe for you to keep learning things about yourself over time. Because I know
Mhm.
even for me, it's been fascinating to discover through therapy, through life, that
Mhm.
sometimes you think you know exactly who you are,
Mhm.
but all you really remember is what you were reinforced to focus on. So there's
Absolutely.
all these parts of ourselves that if we weren't given praise for it, if we weren't told in so many ways, like this is an acceptable part of your personality, make
Mhm.
that bigger.
Mhm.
Do we really remember who we were before we were told which parts of ourselves were acceptable versus unacceptable? And
Yeah.
it runs the gamut. It isn't even just the types of identities we generally think of as being marginalized.
Mhm.
Depending on where you're born, whether or not you're a quiet person is a non issue or it's a big old problem.
Oh, yes.
And
Oh,
whether
yes.
you're going to move forward at a job if you are a person who is more inwardly focused.
Mhm.
Spoiler alert, nobody wants you to move forward. They just want the extroverts. But still, you got to be big and
Yes.
loud and bold, but then not too loud unless you are a cis man,
Mhm.
preferably white. Don't be
Right.
broke either. So there's all kinds of rules around it. But it's fascinating when you're in spaces where people invite you to keep growing, keep learning about yourself, where they'll stay flexible
Mhm.
instead of them being like, well, that's weird. I don't ever remember you saying that before. Like you get that reaction from some people when you come out of any kind of closet. Some people who've known you for years
Oh,
will
yeah.
take it personally, like you lied to me this whole time. It's like,
Mhm.
did I though? Or
Right.
is my understanding of myself evolving all the time?
Mhm.
And did I previously feel unsafe
Mhm.
acknowledging this part of myself?
Mhm.
Even when you said you've met people who will give you like an easy, quote unquote, easier version of their name or more palatable version,
Mhm.
and you invite them to share the name they were actually given. Like being in communities where people are going to keep inviting you
Mhm.
to share, and knowing also that it's okay for you to say no, because I know there's some people who their real name or their birth name, it's a literal secret. It's strictly for their
Family.
people,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
um but just understanding that there are spaces where people are not so attached to perfection, who know that human growth takes time, and that being in any kind of community, it's nuanced and it requires one-on-one attention,
Mhm.
flexibility, grace for yourself. I think
Mhm.
that's one of the big things that makes the pronoun discussion challenging for Americans in particular. Culturally, it is a big deal here to appear friendly to
Yeah.
everybody,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of markers of friendliness that actually are diametrically opposed to true communication,
Yes.
authenticity, and connection.
Yeah.
So if it's deemed unfriendly to ever correct people, then if you don't immediately guess or assume the right thing about someone, that means anyone who's different from what you have been around up until now,
Mhm.
they have no chance of really connecting with you in a meaningful way because you have this rule that it's unfriendly to correct people.
Yeah.
So, really thinking about that, what assumptions do we have? What cultural assumptions are making it impossible for some people to really connect with us?
Yeah. And what I'll say, as we sort of, I mean, we could go on. I love this conversation and we could probably talk for a good hour about this or more and weave into multiple conversations. Um, what one of the things that came to me as you were sharing is that for people who are afraid, or let me just say people who have a problem with other people's expansion, with the people
Mm.
around you, your expansion, what that's an indicator of is that you need to look at your own work. Like, where are you not expanding? I often find that for the people who are afraid of other people's expansion, of other people's fluency, of other people's capacity, flexibility, and capacity to navigate and move beyond when they start to try to make people small, like that's an indication to look at yourself and look at where are you not expanding? Where are you not flexible?
Mm.
Where are you not leveling up so to speak, in your
Yes.
own learnings and um, whatever capacity that is. So I just want to like sort of punctuate that for people who have a problem with whether it's gender identity or whether it's a problem with marginalized communities, whether it's a problem with how like uh, introvert versus extrovert, how people appear or how what they need for themselves. Anytime a person has a problem with boundaries or a person's expansion, it's time for them to look at where are they lacking in that exact thing. That's the shadow
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, and the lack of flexibility. Like, that is such a good thing to highlight, that some people, if they're getting so angry at you for just allowing yourself to continue to evolve, it could be rage that they have against themselves, that they're just, misdirecting because they
Hmm.
didn't know they had permission to
Hmm.
change or evolve in any way. So maybe they've
Hmm.
been stuck in a life that doesn't make sense for them. And
Hmm.
they thought their only option was just to keep on suffering because that's just how things are. And now they're
Right.
livid because you're out here claiming your happiness.
Right.
And they're
Right.
like, I didn't even know that was an option. And now they're mad at you.
Right. Which is, yeah, and a very unfair thing, I should say. Well,
Yeah.
Well, I have just loved this conversation. I've loved the way it's nuanced. I love just the theme of bringing grace, and I want to thank you for just coming back on, Dahlia, and um, you know having this very authentic, honest conversation, because this is not a conversation I've had before either, and I always like to put myself as an example of the learnings. So if I'm not constantly like showing my learnings, then I become unapproachable as an instructor, as a teacher. So I appreciate you coming on to bring that space for me, and how you've contributed to my audience as well. So I really want,
My pleasure.
oh yes, I really want the audience here to know how they can, follow you, reach out to you if they want to work with you specifically, if they want you to come speak for them, like how can they reach you?
The best thing to do is visit dahliakinsey.com, and you can see what I'm doing with organizations, what I do for individuals. I am generally a ghost on social media, but I have brought my YouTube channel back to life. So that's YouTube/ Dahlia Kinsey. And yes, I soon believe I will be everywhere and less of a ghost on social media, but we'll see.
Well, we will have your website and YouTube on in our show notes. So if you're listening live here, we will make sure we put these in the descriptions. And if you're listening to the podcast audio, you'll be in season 4 here, and we will have all of this information in the show notes. So once again, I just really appreciate you, and looking forward to meeting you in person at some point. You're right here in the
Yes.
same
We
area as
keep
me.
forgetting that we're
Keep
like
forgetting.
neighbors. Yeah.
We gotta have lunch.
Well, thank you for modeling this for everybody, because I think there's a lot of people who imagine anybody who's working in inclusion never makes a mistake. And I
Mm,
think we need to keep modeling that that's not a thing, and it's not even a good goal to have, because it's literally impossible for all humans. And even some of the things I said today, I was thinking people will read certain neurodivergent people as
mm,
introverts and then ridicule and subject them to the same type of heat for not being friendly
yeah,
enough, when in reality, this is literally just them being themselves. They
right.
shouldn't have to perform neurotypicalness for
Mhm.
us. So I'm always expanding my understanding of who is basically being shafted by by the social rules of the day, and there's always something to learn. So thanks for modeling that and giving me a space to talk about that.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure. So you all heard it. You want to connect with Dahlia, go to dahliakinsey.com. And really, I always like to thank the audience who's listening, those who listen live, those who will listen to this on replay, those who will listen to this on the podcast when it releases. Thank you for being a listener. Without the listeners, there are no podcasts. And I invite you to share this because this is a very important conversation. And especially if you're a listener and you are in the activism space, you're in the anti-oppression space, then this is something that needs to be shared. So share it with your colleagues, your family, your friend, your community, so that people can really start to bring grace around this. And also be aware and be mindful of the boundaries that need to be set in this space. So you can share this with your favorite people in your community, and really uplift Dahlia here. So with that, I will bid everyone adieu. You all have an amazing rest of the day and an amazing rest of the week. And once again, thank you for listening. Have a great day. Bye now.